I'm delighted to have the opportunity to have Michael Johnson here joining me today on the podcast. Michael, I'm really excited to have this chance to meet and speak with you. How has your day been going so far? Have you been having a good day? What sort of what side of the bed did you wake up on today?
Today is off to a good start.
All right, good.
There's always a challenge of so many things to do and not enough time to do them.
Oh
So
yeah,
just focus on what I can do and try to get into a rhythm. And yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
absolutely. Do you reside in Asheville, North Carolina?
Yes, that's correct.
Nice. And I saw that you lead the philosophy part of the teacher training at the studio in Asheville. Is that true?
I offer many programs on yoga philosophy at the Asheville Yoga Center and have been doing that for about 15 years.
Nice.
I also lead philosophy at the Ayurvedic Institute and teach Sanskrit so that people can not only better understand the wisdom of Ayurveda and the language that many of the greats, such as Charaka and Sushruta, have recorded them in, but
Mm.
also to understand yoga philosophy in as clearly as possible, as the Yoga Sutra and Hatha Yoga Pradipika were all composed in Sanskrit.
Wow. I mean, learning and studying Sanskrit is a big undertaking. How did you introduced to Sanskrit language, and at what point did you decide, you know what? I'm going to study this. I'm going to try to learn this. When did that happen for you?
That was about 20 years ago when I first learned about the Yoga Sutra.
Mm.
My introduction to yoga in a deep way was through Deepak Chopra.
Mm.
He came to Detroit, Michigan, where I was living at the time, and led us through a meditation that allowed me, for the first time, at least in this lifetime, to be able to discern the seer and the seen and have this space to
Mm.
be able to navigate whatever came up. And I got very interested in his books. I started reading a lot of his writings, and often when he would talk, like got the audio book for Ageless Body, Timeless Mind, and most of what he said just like went over my head.
Yeah.
So I listened to the book like several times before I could start to understand him, the speed that he wanted to talk.
Yeah.
And eventually, I got his book, Everyday Immortality. The audio version was something I listened to over and over again. And in the beginning, he described what a sutra was. It's a compact statement that if you listen to it, it was like a seed and it would reveal many potential understandings
Mm.
if you could just sit and abide and see all of its potential.
Nice.
So he described the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali as the way that yoga was taught. Each sutra was a seed, and that the practitioner would first memorize it and then sit in meditation and contemplate the meanings of each statement, how they all tied together.
Mm.
I, after that, immediately went and bought my first copy of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. That was from Swami Satchidananda, and
Nice.
started to memorize his translation. And I got a little sidetracked by his definition of yoga chitta vritti nirodha, as yoga is the restraint of the mental modifications of the mind stuff.
Yeah.
Like, what does that even mean?
Right off the bat, like sutra number two, you were just going, whoa, where do I even go here? Yeah.
I read his commentary. I even like met him. I went and studied at the Satchidananda Ashram in Yogaville, Virginia for a month. I did their living yoga training program and
Nice.
had a very positive experience. Um, but when I compared his translation of the Yoga Sutra to a number of others, I was befuddled.
Mm.
To be memorizing this English translation, because everyone's English translation of those four words, yoga chitta vritti nirodha, is different,
Yes.
and not just in a trivial surface way, but very different. They all lead in very different paths.
Yeah.
So that's what eventually led me to be more interested in the Sanskrit language, the language the text was written in. I eventually ended up studying with a comparative religion professor named Brian Kelly Smith.
Mm.
He eventually became a monk and was given the monk's name Marut. And a lot of his students called him Lama Marut. And he convinced me that if you want to understand the philosophy of the Yoga Sutra, you have to learn the language it was composed in. And he gave me the confidence that I could do it. He was like a Columbia University professor and a University of California Riverside professor, and he just inspired me to eventually learn the language.
Wow.
I always struggled with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder my
Mm.
whole life. I was diagnosed when I was like 3. My mom never gave me medication, but I learned I could self-medicate with coffee.
Mm.
My teen
Interesting.
years helped me concentrate.
Yeah.
But yoga was a game changer. The ability to use my breath and not ignore but inhabit my body, and to be able to concentrate without the use of coffee or outside sources was
Mm.
super helpful.
Yes.
I've always had a lot of learning disabilities regarding that, and I never learned Sanskrit in a organized way. Like, you go to an academic institution, they'll teach you Sanskrit like the first week. Okay, learn the Devanagari alphabet. Second week, we'll do all the combinations, and like the trajectory of those courses are usually like half the class drops out by week 2.
Yeah.
The next half by
Yeah. That's a huge, just
by
in, yeah.
the end of the course, there's a handful of people left, but they know Sanskrit, and that seems to be making Sanskrit more elite and inaccessible. So, though it's taken me a lot longer to learn Sanskrit than most people, my motivation has been to understand yoga, this healing practice that I've found so helpful, that I think could be helpful to a lot more people. So, one of the ways that I teach Sanskrit at the Ayurvedic Institute is through the practice of yoga.
Cool.
And yoga is, however you look at the many translations of Yoga Chittavritti Nirodha, it's essentially a methodology of developing self-control. So if you look at the first 3 sutras, or the first 4 sutras in the Yoga Sutra, the first sutra is Atta Yoga Anushasanam. Now yoga is explained, or the exposition of yoga is being made. And it's a somewhat of a trivial way that many texts begin. So in all of the schools of South Asian or Indian philosophy, they say Atta this, Atta that. So Atta Nyaya, Atta Sankhya, and they're just introducing the topic. But when the Yoga Sutra says Atta Yoga Anushasanam, it might mean something a bit different. If you go deeper into the text, the word now is investigated with samadhi to mean not just the trivial now, this, but now,
Mm.
this,
Yes.
in a very profound way. So I include that to being an important part of the introduction. We have an ordinary view of time, conventional view of time. It's very linear and very much wrapped into our human experience. But even physicists can step outside of that, like Einstein or Niels Bohr, and start to see timelessness, or the possibilities of imaginary time, or limitless time. And I think that the author may have implied that when he opened the text like that.
Mm.
So with that in mind, Yoga Chittavritti Nirodha, the word yoga is the subject that's being spoken of. And when you combine that with chitta, which is typically meant to be the mind, yoga turns to yogash chitta due to Sanskrit grammar rule called sandhi. And vritti is activity. So it comes from the verbal root vert, which means to turn. And The activities of the mind are later explained in the text. But the word Narodaha is a very interesting word that one can take in many different directions. The sutra style of composition was brilliant in the sense that it took huge bodies of understanding and compressed them so that it could be memorized and then understood. But often multiple layers were implied by the author. So the fact that he used the word Narodaha, which in Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit means a cessation, but in other texts, the word Narodaha might mean govern or control. And those are paradoxical because logically they don't necessarily line up in every way that one might want them to. So the translation of Yoga Chittavritti Nirodha by the words alone, if you go to a dictionary and just like, I like that word, I like that word, I'll make a sentence, can come up with something that might make a lot of sense to the translator, but not necessarily convey what's being spoken of in the text. And this style of translation is very common. And when you try to take your understanding and then thread it through the rest of the text and have it explain all of the information and navigate the controversies, then you start to see how some translations fare better than others.
Mm.
So a lot of people will translate yoga chittavritti nirodha as yoga is the cessation of mental activities. And that can allow one to assume that the mind is the active part and consciousness, purusha, pure consciousness, is inactive and timeless. And for a lot of people, that takes them to this place where they return home. They abide in their true form, which they believe is pure consciousness, limitless. And that said, the next two sutras offers a little bit more clarity on that. And another way to translate that would be yoga chittavritti nirodha. Yoga is controlling the mental activities. And this suggests that Purusha isn't independently available to see or understand, but actually requires mental activities in order to have that experience of knowing and
Mm.
being. And if you understand the context of the philosophical schools that were around at that time, the way that we know them today, like the six major schools of India, Vedanta, which has many branches and different persuasions, Sankhya, which is another school that's Vedic friendly, but also very materialist, reductionist, and very scientific. Um, but yeah, like the disagreements between Sankhya and Vedanta is enough to keep a person busy for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
But if you take into consideration that this text may have actually been written for Buddhists, or people who had a sympathy for Buddhism, but were looking for something more or just something to contrast that or parallax that with, then both are worth considering. Either yoga is controlling the mental activities um, rather than being controlled by them, or yoga is the cessation of mental activities, which arguably could give you the space to stop reacting to them and then to engage in them with more integrity. So, both are worth considering, and attempting to please all of these schools is an impossible task. But listening to them and attempting to offer a presentation of developing self-control that could appeal to many of them is, I think, what Patanjali was doing.
It's
So,
fascinating. It's so fascinating. I remember my first interaction with Narodaha was from the angle of the definition of cessation. So this idea, I had this thought or this idea that Okay, yoga, when I get good at yoga, or if I achieve yoga, or I make some progress on the path, that my thoughts will cease. And then I heard someone give the exposition on, or the idea, the translation, that Nirodha could mean, like you said, control, or like to yoke, or to like harness the energy of. And that potentially then, if somebody is feeling like, I'm practicing yoga and I constantly have thoughts and my thoughts never stop, so maybe I'm not progressing on the path of yoga. But then when I heard the idea that you're presenting, that instead of stopping the thoughts, that if you can harness the thoughts, or change your thinking, or be aware of your thinking, even, that then maybe one feels that they're having some progress on the path of yoga, because the thoughts are still there, but now I can almost interact with the thoughts, and it doesn't feel so daunting and frustrating when my mind just keeps going and going and going. So I love how, like, what you're bringing attention to, this subtle shift of the definition of that word really has a different sort of impact. And I like that you're also presenting the fact that it's worth investigating all of these different possibilities to see how we can now utilize this in our own life. In your own experience, in relation to the variation between cessation and or the harnessing of, what how does your practice tend to unfold, or your outlook on life unfold in relation to that awareness or understanding?
Well, one of the ways that I can make better sense of yoga and the Yoga Sutra, not only with the rest of the text, but with other texts, like the Katha Upanishad presents yoga as self-control. It's basically taking the reins of the mind and steering the emotions rather than just being taken for a ride. It's choosing to do the right thing, Shreya, rather than what is most pleasant, Preya. And if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, another presentation of yoga, Krishna is the charioteer holding onto the reins. The body is the chariot, the horses are the emotions, and the passenger is the self. And despite Krishna being the Lord of time and space and beyond our conventional understanding, he does make a case for devotion to right action, doing what is right, even when it's not pleasant. And he, in the 17th chapter, I think, states that, maybe it's the 18th chapter, that there's three kinds of happiness. There's one where you abide in your own form and you're not attached to outcomes, and you do the right thing. And it might be like poison at first, but it becomes nectar. So that's how he describes sattva. And then rajas is like where you're attached to outcomes. You're acting for the sake of something, and that might be like nectar at first, but it eventually turns to poison.
Mm.
And then he describes tamas as you're just diluted in the beginning, diluted in the end. It's like poison in the beginning. And he also describes that being attached to sattva is like the the puzzle that we need to solve.
Mm.
His moral ethical theory in the Bhagavad Gita is unique. A lot of academics and philosophers have tried to frame the Bhagavad Gita in terms of what they know and what they believe and what they understand. And in the West, we have moral ethical theories that are common to us, and many have foisted their beliefs and opinions on the Gita and read it through that lens and get a certain result. I'm currently studying with philosophers that are attempting to decolonize yoga, to decolonize yoga from not just the British occupation and all that happened that brought yoga to the West in a certain way, but even decolonizing it from the Mughal Empire and some of the previous occupations that have occurred and have distorted yoga in one way or another.
That's fascinating.
And that, that's a project that
Yeah.
may never
Yeah.
be completed, but one can learn some valuable things in attempting to do so.
Mm.
And one of the things that I found really helpful is that in the Bhagavad Gita, as well as the Katha Upanishad and the Yoga Sutra, there's a meta ethical theory being presented there that we don't find in the West.
A
So,
meta ethical, did you say?
yeah, so it's looking at um, ethics from a distance,
Mm,
the ethics of ethics.
got it. Got it.
One of the ways that we do that in the West is we tend to look at everything through the lens of virtue ethics, like a Platonic, Aristotelian way of understanding things, where a good person, a good character determines what right action is. And another to contrast that would be consequentialism or utilitarianism, where no, it's actually the good outcome that determines right action. And the beginning of the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, like Arjuna is just expressing how both of those fail.
Mm,
Even if I win this war, I will not be a good person in other people's eyes or even my own. And how can that be right? And even if I win this war, I'll have to kill my family and destroy so many lives. Um, how could that possibly be right? Another meta-ethical theory in the West is deontology. It was championed by Immanuel Kant, but there are many examples of it, and this is basically the right argument justifies a good action, and this is similar to what Krishna starts offering Arjuna with karma yoga, when he basically says, "Act without being attached to outcomes. You have every right to act, but not to the action's fruit." And a deontological way of solving moral dilemmas is, well, I'm just gonna stick to this rule or to this ideal that feels right, and gonna ride that out no matter what. And this can be super helpful in overcoming the weaknesses of the first two I mentioned, as
mm,
virtue ethics, consequentialism are both outcome driven. It's all about
mm,
the outcome. Whereas deontology, it's more about the process. It's
mm,
more about how you are. Instead of treating people as means to an end, treat people as ends. And that one rule can transform all of your relationships, and has its merit. However, that's
mm,
not where Krishna stops in the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna is not satisfied with karma yoga. He has more questions about it, and he eventually ends up presenting bhakti yoga. So bhakti yoga is the yoga of devotion. And in the Bhagavad Gita, bhakti is devotion to Krishna as the Lord of time and space, who is Brahman, who is everywhere in all things, and not exactly pantheism, like we might have learned about it through Spinoza, but more like panentheism, where yes, Brahman is within all things and is divine in its pure form, but some of the forms that it produces are just not divine, like lying, cheating, murder, and stuff like that. That's not divine.
mm,
So the Bhagavad Gita is a very beautiful poem that has inspired many people, but philosophically, needs a little to be desired to have a straightforward, non-self-contradicting argument as to what yoga is.
mm,
I think the Yoga Sutra provides that. It's the earliest known exposition of yoga as a philosophy, a darshana, you could say, that is self-consistent and consistent with experience. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Ishvara is described in absences. Buddhists would have liked that, like the Dharmakaya of a Buddha, for example. And
in relation to when you say that, so Ishvara, which maybe we could translate as God,
most people do.
said, and then you said there's the God in the shadows, so to speak, or like I guess in relation to nothingness or emptiness, where you said the Buddhists would be appreciative of this idea of the Ishvara being
Yeah,
hidden, so to
great
speak.
question. So Ishvara, if you look up the word, many people will see it as God, and you can see it referenced as Vishnu or Shiva in some cases, and all of the attributes that people associate with those things. But for the Buddhists of that time, they were notably non-theistic, as were most Sankyans. And by that time, I mean like the fourth century of the Common Era.
And just to clarify for listener capacity here, we have the word theistic, atheistic, and non-theistic. And to differentiate theism, belief in a God, atheism, belief there is no God, and then non-theism is like, I prefer not to speak about it. Is that
Or,
could
or
that
yeah,
work? Is that
you
translate?
know,
Yeah.
maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I don't
May-
necessarily have a need for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry,
Um,
not to interrupt, but I like that you brought that word non-theistic because I don't think we hear that as often as either theism or atheism, that there's another option. There's a third party here. Yeah.
yeah. We could also say there's a fourth option, anti-theism, where people are trying to squash the idea. But as far as the Yoga Sutra, it's
Let me back up. Wait. The anti-theism. So wait, trying to squash. So how is that? How is anti and a
so
different?
like atheistic is that like I don't subscribe to that view.
Mm,
Where anti-theistic, like not only do I not subscribe to that view, you
well,
should not.
I'm against
I
it.
will spend my time and energy to try to convince you out of it.
Mm. All right. I haven't even heard that
Which
one yet. Thank you. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
uh,
All right. Sorry. Continue, please.
like Christopher Hitchens wrote a book, God is Not Great. That was the view that he subscribed to.
Got it. Got it. Thank you.
So back to the Yoga Sutra, the way that Ishvara is described in the Yoga Sutra is the ideal for Bhakti Yoga. So Bhakti Yoga is devotion, and devotion to this ideal of Ishvara, um, could mean Vishnu or some god that has a form. Many schools of Vedanta require that. But it also opens the possibility, the way that Ishvara is described in the Yoga Sutra, as devotion to this ideal that doesn't have a form necessarily.
Mm, mm,
And the absences aren't nothing. So emptiness and nothingness are sometimes considered synonyms, but the Buddhists went through great length to discern those two. So emptiness is actually something. It's the presence of an absence.
mm.
So
Yes.
like my hand right here, it seems that it's pretty solid and consistent, but it actually is empty of permanence. It wasn't always here, won't always be here, and that's how it does exist. So the absence of permanence is something, and that idea is conveyed in the Yoga Sutra as the absence of kleshas, the mental activities that control you, also called mental fluctuations. Some people translate chitta vritti as mental fluctuations, and therefore yoga is the cessation of mental fluctuation. And that actually works through the rest of the text.
Nice. Nice.
So you basically could also translate that as yoga is the cessation of mental afflictions.
Mm,
But the rest of the text doesn't describe chitta vritti as afflictions. It says the chitta vritti can be afflicted or unafflicted. So that translation doesn't work as well.
got it.
But the Ishvara is described in the 24th Sutra as Klesha Karma Vipaka Shar Parmarshta Purusha Vishesha Ishvara. So the text itself says that Ishvara is a Purusha Vishesha, the ideal of a person that is free of mental afflictions, kleshas, the afflicted actions that come when we're controlled by our mental activities and we act, so rajas, known as karma. Karma causes rebirth in the cycle of suffering. And attachment to outcomes, the paka, so the fruit of one's actions, as well as storing them in the karmashaya. So ashayahi is how it describes it. And that's what happens whenever we're identified with our thoughts instead of taking responsibility for shaping them. So Ishvara is this ideal of a person that's free of all that stuff, just like the Dharmakaya of a Buddha.
I understand. Thank you for clarifying that. That
Yeah,
was a good explanation.
And you don't need to do anything to like create the Dharmakaya of a Buddha. It's uncreated, it's unchanging, it's already perfect. So you just need to devote yourself to approximating that ideal so that you too can be free of afflictions and afflicted actions, their outcomes, and identifying with them.
Is the Dharmakaya school and or philosophy in the same realm as the Ati Yoga, or this idea that you already are enlightened? The attempt to achieve samadhi is unnecessary. And so that's almost like awakening to this is it. I'm already here. Just such a fat is that in that Dharmakaya school of
It,
thought?
it certainly could be. So, Buddhism, like Vedanta, there's so many branches and strands, and Ati Yoga is uh, considered the highest yoga. And you can see really beautiful presentations of that in Padmasambhava's work, which gave rise to the Nyingma school in Tibet that brought us Dzogchen, the natural perfection. And their approach to um, practicing yoga is instead of start off at the beginning and work your way up to like the end, start at the end and
Mm,
way back to the beginning.
yeah.
And the
Started
beautiful,
enlightenment and then and what was that? Was it what was the word you used? Deontological? Was that it? Like the ontology in
the
reverse?
ontological is like it's like yoga in the sense that it's procedural and not outcome driven.
Ah, that's right.
It's
Got it.
more about just the process, the
All right.
experience, not
Got
to get somewhere else or
it. Yeah.
acquire something you don't already have.
Yes.
But deontology, as well as virtue ethics and consequentialism, can all be predicted by bad actors and exploited to serve their not so great ends. And that's the situation that Arjuna finds himself in.
Mm,
Gita, the Kauravas have basically um, created the circumstances where whatever one of those three metaethical theories they try, they're going to be exploited. And this fourth option, however, called bhakti or yoga, synonyms for the same thing. Yoga and bhakti philosophically are not two different things, they're one and the same. This is something that can't be as easily predicted or exploited by bad actors. So one can stand in their own form, and instead of reacting to someone that's trying to make you do something or get something out of you, you can choose to respond with integrity, and they can't take that away from you. So the bhakti or yoga theory was something that Gandhi used in order to start his satyagraha, um, non-violent, non-cooperation way to fight the British occupation. And Martin Luther King Jr. used that same meta-ethical theory, civil rights, and it certainly has its place in this world. It might not be the only way that one can be, or the best way for everyone, but it is a way that has notable benefits that people ought to be free to choose if they want.
mm. Can you give an example of a time recently where you, with this information, consciously employed bhakti as a way of holding your integrity? And it could be something as superficial as the guy at the gas pump honked at me and yelled at me and said, "Hurry up." Or what? I'm just kind of curious, a real life scenario where you've had to draw upon this and then choose to practice it that could help make it applicable for a listener to potentially try the same technique themselves when faced with this dilemma.
I can offer you two examples. One would be like more everyday type experiences, and another one might be unique to me, but we'll see. So, anytime you have a relationship and you're wanting to be in a harmonious state with the other person, if you're not trying to change them or get something out of them, you're just happy to be with them. You can through bhakti yoga, like offer them your support, your love, your compassion, and not be attached to whatever the outcome is. And that harmony is like almost instantaneous.
Good answer.
um, I had one extreme situation where someone using cyber threats, they threatened to hunt me down and kill me. I guess they didn't like my political views or whatever reason.
Whoa.
And
That's
that,
heavy. Like literally had somebody contact you and say, I'm coming for you because whatever reason. Oh my
well,
gosh.
it was indirectly. They sent the message to someone else.
Mm.
But I asked all my friends, yeah, like you should take death threats seriously. So I went to the authorities and I did the whole deontological thing. Like, well, you go and report the incident and make
Yes.
sure that all of the procedures are done. And that's very unsatisfying, as we don't really have laws to protect people from cyber threats. And but I did it anyways. And as far as the other, when you're attached to a specific outcome, like feeling safe, which who doesn't want to feel safe?
Yeah.
When someone threatens to take that away from you, not just by ending your life, but he went on to threaten my family and so many things. Um, yeah, like I was kind of left with this only other option of not being attached to an outcome. So instead of virtue ethics or consequentialism, I have this other way of just, well, I can be here right now and abide in my own form. And though I can't control what this person does or doesn't do, or so many things that are outside of me, I can actually choose how I think, how I speak, how I act, and not be attached to those outcomes. And I can abide in my own form. And this allowed me to, allow my nervous system to process all of the defense mechanisms that got tangled in knots after that experience. And I'm still untangling it, but it allows me to be with myself just the way I am, even though that isn't always the way it ought to be. Um, I can steer myself in that direction and not let someone else stop me
Yeah.
or steer me away.
Ooh, that's powerful. That's super powerful because that's coming down to our like will to survive. Is the word in the Yoga Sutras, is it a benivesha? Did I get, am I in the right thread? What is the word that's,
You're totally on the right thread. Yeah. So Abhinivesha is often translated as fear of death. But if you look it up in any dictionary, um, none of them say that. They say clinging,
mm,
grasping.
mm,
And in the context of the Yoga Sutra, it goes into some more elaborate detail in like the 31st sutra, the first chapter, and in the second chapter, when it describes Swarasvahi Vidushopi Samarudho Panivesha, it's describing trauma. It's describing a wise person might actually still carry trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder, as we call it now, where even though they've had significant transformation through self-control and under most circumstances might behave quite principled and rationally, when their defense mechanisms are triggered, then basically there's a loss of self-control. It's either the fight, flight, freeze, or some combination of that. And that still exists even in those who are wise. I think I read a commentary somewhere like most people seem to at least pretend to be enlightened. So you grab them by the ankles and hang them from a 10-story building. And pretty much
the
what tends
true
to play out.
test. That's the big test.
But
Yeah.
yeah, in that context, Abhinivesha is listed as a klesha. So it's something that distracts us from the practice of yoga. And when you have a loss of self control, it isn't necessarily by choice. And I think that's something that everyone ought to understand. When our autonomic nervous system, our involuntary nervous system, senses threat or danger, what a researcher Stephen Porges calls neuroception,
Yes.
he basically says the defense mechanism just comes on automatically, not by choice. So a person will freeze. And the reason why that is evolutionarily our ancestors had that response, and it was adaptive. You know, like our ancestors, they came across the poisonous snake, and those who tried to run got bit and died, or those who tried to fight it got bit and died. Those who just froze and did nothing carried
Mm,
on, passed their
mm,
genes to the next generation. So the freeze response can, come up in any of us, but often it comes up in our relationships. Someone says something and it uh, causes us to not feel safe, and then we just don't do anything. And a lot of people just assume that, oh, this person doesn't like me, or this person's being a jerk, when really it's not a choice. It was a trauma response.
mm. Yeah, I had that one recently. That's a good. I'm glad you're bringing that up.
So,
Ha-
yoga is a not the only way, but a way to recover from trauma. And kleshas are an example of when the mental activities control you. And what makes abhinivesha more constant is when we're identified with our thoughts. So that's the klesha of asmita, where we look for our self-image in the current activity of our thoughts. So if you have a mean thought, you think you're mean. If you have a kind thought, you think you're kind. And that can go pretty well as long as you have pretty consistent control of your thoughts. But if you come to the realization that you might not necessarily be in control of your thoughts, that's suddenly your thoughts become a prison.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the uh, the opposite of asmita would be yoga. It would be choosing to discern the seer in the scene. Something that Deepak Chopra helped me with like 25 years ago. Um, that I was very grateful for, but I didn't really understand or know how to recreate as frequently as I wanted. But it turns out that the Yoga Sutra offers some really helpful advice on those. So the identification with thoughts cripples our ability to practice self-control. And so many people are doing it. If you're going by virtue ethics, like good people are identified with their thoughts, therefore that's the right thing to do. Might be your way of attempting to go through the world. But that's, like J. Krishnamurti said, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a sick society. So just because other people are doing it doesn't mean it's a great idea. So if you look at all of the mature spiritual traditions in India, all of them point out this particular thing that we call egotism, where we're identified with our thoughts, and offer this alternative where you can abide in your own form and as pure consciousness observe thoughts without identifying with them. Some people might take that too far and try to disassociate from their thoughts, make their thoughts go away, like then I'll be happy. But I'll suggest that's another trauma response.
Mm.
Disassociation, again, is your nervous system trying to protect you from something it finds threatening. But pretending that thoughts don't exist doesn't make them go away. And yoga is this option of where you abide in your own form in the presence of whatever thought might be arising, lingering, and passing away. And by discerning the seer, the seen, and the seeing, you can create this space between stimulus and response to choose an appropriate response to the thought. And if you don't know what the right response to a thought is, you don't have to pretend to, or look for someone else to do that for you. Rather, you can approximate an ideal, an Ishta Devata, how you choose to be in this world. Like you might see someone who's really inspiring, like, wow, that person's so kind, so patient. I want to be like that. If you make them your idol and you try to be like them, that's another path to hell, which becomes virtue ethics. But if you take like this idea, like you know what? I want to be compassionate, patient, wise. Then, like the Buddhists, that's more of like an unchanging ideal. And the unchanging ideal is perfect. Can also argue that it's imaginary, but real nonetheless. Just because it's abstract doesn't mean that it's not real. And by devotion to that ideal, like the bodhisattva of compassion or the Buddha of wisdom, we can be human beings and we can make better and better choices how we relate to our thoughts and become more like that. So that's another way of looking at Ati Yoga from the Yoga Sutra.
Interesting. Cool. So you do teacher trainings, and I'm guessing like you took us down an incredible path just now. A lot of information. And imagine like a couple times I thought, whoa, my mind is doing gymnastics right now. Like it got a little intense. I was just relax and just listen. I don't have to like grasp onto every single, maybe I won't understand every single thing you're saying right now, but at the same time, I'm getting the overall picture. And when you're teaching students that are new to yoga philosophy, and you start to see that they're kind of closing down, you know, like they're looking at their phone, they're like going over the coffee pot, whatever it is that like just like oh my gosh, like what is the strategy here in your I mean just a couple things, Michael, just if you don't mind me just bringing up, like you said that you had challenges as a child learning, but wow, you're taking it to a level that's like deep and not exhibiting to me any sense of challenge with learning. You know what I mean? Like you've got such a deep grasp of these concepts, your ability to memorize the sutras, learn the language, pull them from your memory banks, deliver them, and then continue the conversation and draw from all these different aspects. It's very obvious to me that you've been studying this seriously for a long period of time. So then the new student appears, and how do you I mean, what we're doing right now is how we do it, right? Like we just talk about it. We just start, just let's get started. Let's just get started. But how do you coach your students in relation to the assimilation process? I remember one time when I took a long distance philosophy course with Georg Feuerstein. It was an 800-hour course, and it took me a couple years to get through. And I remember like midway through, I hit this point where I've been investigating so many different ideas and thoughts and different books and traditions that it got so overwhelming. I was like, I need to take a break. This is like so intense. And I had to stop for a minute and just step away. How has your journey been in relation to like the vigor for enthusiasm and learning? And then at times where do you ever have that moment where you're like, holy cow, I need to just like go for a walk and not think about anything like or try to
Sure.
understand anything. Like, I mean, because the level of depth that the Indian philosophical traditions goes, I mean, it seems from my experience, it's like no stone has been left unturned. Like if I think I could come up with a new idea about a way of understanding life and reality and the and existence and the potential for no existence and all these different ideas, it's like the India culture has it so well mapped out that we have to study. I mean, in my opinion, you have to dive into India philosophy if you have any interest in, like trying to figure out or having some grasp of like the nature of reality and the big questions, why am I here? And but I guess back to my initial question with you, what is a strategy for beginning philosophy students to try to walk this path without feeling overwhelmed?
Wow, these are great questions. And first, I just wanted to say, don't be fooled. I struggle all the time with learning.
Okay,
And
thank you.
it looks like I know something. It's because I've spent a lot of time getting it wrong and learning from my mistakes. And
Mm,
most importantly, being able to discern myself from my mistakes.
mm,
And
Being able to
That is
discern
huge.
myself from my mistakes. So not seeing mistakes as a personal problem or a like you and the mistake are not the same thing.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm the one who made the mistake, but because I'm not the mistake, I have the option to not keep making it.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
can make better choices, and
Mm.
that decoupling from thoughts uh,
Mm.
is yoga. And but yeah, to answer your question as forward as possible, the best way to learn this is through conversations like these,
Yeah.
and mainly listening carefully to each person. And I struggle to make yoga as accessible as possible to people of all kinds, regardless of whatever challenges they might be going through. And I certainly haven't figured that out. That's something that I'm still learning, but I have, no shortage of trying this and that, and
I love that. Yeah.
ways that work better than others. And every individual, I think, is unique. And one of the directions that I'm aiming to grow in is to integrate yoga and Ayurveda. So Ayurveda to speak to the depth and the beauty of the many Indian philosophical positions. I don't necessarily think that one has to study Indian philosophy, but wow, your worldview and experience of life would be enriched greatly if you chose to. Same with Ayurveda. I didn't know that much about it, and therefore I thought I knew everything that it had to offer, which is the first klesha called avidya. It's ignorance of our ignorance. It leads to misunderstanding. Like,
Mm.
not only do we not know, we don't even know that we don't know. We think we do know, and that's a big barrier to learning.
Good
But
point.
one of the things that can stop us from learning.
Ooh, great point. How many
And
times a day do
uh,
I do that with different things? Yeah. I like the way you said that with Ayurveda. Like, I thought I knew enough about it to not really understand it, or like, yeah, that I do understand what you just said. I didn't say it as well as you just said, but I got it. I think I got it.
now that I teach Ayurvedic students how to read the sutras that are required for them to understand Ayurveda, I'm learning that it's so much more deep, powerful, and useful than I had even imagined. Um, every person has a different constitution. So, even though you and I look almost identical,
We do. I should
uh,
put my glasses back on. Yeah.
but yeah, some people just have more of like a kapha constitution. Some people more of a vata constitution. So kapha is like earth and water and like very solid. And some, vata is like air and very all over the place. And then some people more pitta, which is more of a fire type constitution. And we all have each of them in us. Some of us are vata pitta kapha, some of our pitta vata kapha, some kata pitta vata, and there's all these different temperaments. And that's kind of like the suit you were born in, and it's not really negotiable. That's like the DNA shuffle that this lifetime produced, and to thrive, to have health, you don't necessarily need to change that. But when it starts to get out of balance, you ought to know like how to steer it back uh, to balance. So being in a healthy body and a healthy state of mind are very important to Ayurveda, and yoga has a lot to offer. So um, I'm certain that yoga and Ayurveda have been integrated in the past and are being integrated now, and I think both are better when integrated. Yoga is this discipline of practicing self-control, taking responsibility. And Ayurveda is the science of health, what causes it, how to promote it, disease, what causes it, how to interrupt it. And with that said, because there's so many different constitutions out there, what might be medicine for one person could be poison for another. And when I'm teaching yoga, for example, For a certain constitution, Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga, like the Mysore style, could be like really awesome for one constitution and like poison for another. Whereas restorative yoga could be like medicine for one person, but also poison for another.
Yes.
Great to have options and to understand what person needs what in order to thrive. I don't know. I'm just figuring it out. But
Yeah.
I'm certain that the more I learn, the better I'll be able to present yoga to people in the way that they need it.
Good point. I saw on your website you have, which is clearlightyoga.com, you have a 200-hour philosophy teacher training, and which I have not. That was the first time I came across somebody doing that. Maybe there's other people doing it. I don't know. But I thought,
It's an
well, that's
experiment.
that's
It's an
brilliant.
online, self-paced
Yeah.
course where we meet every Sunday from 4 to 5 p.m. to discuss the content of these courses that I put together. So there's an interactive component. But yeah, it mainly emphasizes the philosophical underpinnings of yoga, and the goal is to help people enrich their understanding and to continue learning. The more you learn, the more you can learn, and the more you know, the more you realize there is to know. And, I think one can be content being humbled like that and living in a state of humility.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And do you attempt to draw a line from let me let's study philosophy, and also let me help give you strategies on ways to communicate the philosophy as a yoga teacher?
So yeah, as far as yoga philosophy and most yoga teacher trainings, it's I think 20 hours are required, and a lot
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
I've taken about 14 different yoga teacher trainings, and
Whoa.
often philosophy is like an appendage, just like this add-on, and each focuses on one aspect of yoga mainly. Whereas I think the philosophy is primary, and everything else could be arranged around the philosophy. And I suspect that would make yoga more accessible.
Yeah. Great. I love that. Let's put the focus on that. Let's start here. Let's do it at a 200-hour level. Excellent. That's so cool, man. I'm so happy to hear about this.
Well, thank you.
I I'm reading a book right now called The Case for God by Karen Armstrong.
Mhm.
Have you ever read any of her work?
I did. I actually read her book about the Buddha.
Nice.
She, her sister was a Buddhist, and she, I think, spent a whole year researching the Buddha's life and presenting all of the historical evidence and the controversies and the main argument for Buddhism. And
Mm.
she did, I think, a fairly great job. I was impressed by the end. I
Yeah.
know that she's like a nun for some time, and then was an atheist for a while, and then now she's probably on the fence, or I don't know.
Yeah. I'm finding it absolutely fascinating. And she's brought a little bit of attention to, through the study of all the different religions of the world, the common ground where, Greek philosophy married with theology and some of the deep Christian thinkers, but, being open and willing to take information in from different schools to really come to this sort of understanding of one of the pinnacle uh, elements in relation to creation myths and creation theory is that how can something come out of nothing, as like being one of the big um, I guess if we're science based or leaning towards science based, we have this idea that like no matter energy isn't created nor destroyed, it's like energy exists. So then this trying to figure out or contemplate the origin of the initial the beginning of the beginning. What would you say the Yoga Sutra has to say? And I feel like you answered that with your very first opening of the Atha Yoga Anushasanam in relation now,
Yeah.
and not just like, okay, now, but like the ever present now.
One
Um,
of the things that I find really refreshing about yoga philosophy,
mm,
uh, and Buddhism, or just philosophy in general, is instead of being dogmatic, like you have to believe this, it encourages you to think for yourself
yeah,
and listen to the arguments and basically choose a position that makes the most sense to you.
yeah,
So that's how I try to teach yoga. I don't try to foist any beliefs or views onto other people, but simply offer them the technology with which they can create some healthy space between themselves and their thoughts and sort them out.
that's
And
cool.
Karen Armstrong seems to have a knack for that.
Yeah,
Another, I can't speak necessarily for Patanjali or the Yoga Sutra, but I can say that I've learned the most from non-dogmatic presentations of it.
yeah,
And I personally think that yoga philosophy is non-dogmatic. It really is philosophy. It's not the only way, but it is a way. And and you can't necessarily say that of all the other schools, but um, one could approach any discipline or any school in South Asia or abroad in a non-dogmatic way and find something beautiful from it.
yeah. Well
But
said.
if you're an anti-theist and like you have an axe to grind and you're attached to like um, a specific outcome, then you're more likely to be taken for a ride and miss out on the opportunity to appreciate what you're learning.
Yeah, good point. I noticed that. I have one more question for you, Michael, because I know I want to stay true to your time schedule here. I noticed on your website that you teach a class called Bhakti Flow into Stillness, and then I tried to imagine. I wonder what that class looks like, and so I guess I'm wondering what you do for Bhakti. I'm thinking you start with movement, ending in meditation, but then what does Bhakti Flow in your definition end up being?
So, I might be a rare example of bhakti yoga in the world. Uh, a non-theistic approach to bhakti is something that inspires me. So Ishvara or the Dharmakaya, for example, is not a god, a creator god, or someone that's responsible for how things are, but it's rather an ideal that I can approximate, or anyone could. And my willingness to speak about that objectively allows me to be very transparent instead of mystical and hide behind um, multiple meanings and fog, but rather in the beginning of the class, I basically introduce yoga. It's a non-dogmatic uh, theory of devotion. I offer a presentation of an aspect of yoga, and then usually like a mantra that illuminates or a sutra that illuminates that particular concept, and I'll encourage people to sing it in the Sanskrit so they can learn it and memorize it, and then we go through a vinyasa practice that's all levels. So I'm trying to like find what would be accessible to widest common denominator to help them be able to make peace with their body as they develop strength, balance, and flexibility, and eventually work towards stillness, not just lying down shavasana, but sitting still in meditation. And that's, I guess, a vignette of
Nice.
what my class looks like.
Nice. Excellent. Great description. And then I really want to just like come right back to what you just said that you are attempting to maintain your authenticity and present a non-theistic perspective of bhakti because bhakti is a very theistic orientated philosophy, right? So
Most
you're you're
presentations of it do take it that
you're
out.
attempting to present the bhakti philosophy but without just going down the theistic realm of it, which is
Yeah.
that's cool, man. That's an interesting challenge to take on. Yeah,
I guess so. I mean, like
I
most of my
like
friends
it.
are theistic and like I love them and wish
Yeah.
them well and everything, but
Yes.
I really went down deep the rabbit hole of Buddhism and the
Mhm.
non-theistic approach to spiritual life. I think just makes more sense to me.
Yeah, I understand.
And some people might call like this unchanging ideal, like the ideal of a bodhisattva, a form of God, and that's fine with me. It doesn't bother me. But I don't necessarily see an unchanging ideal as something to surrender to, but more as an ideal to devote myself to
Mm,
process.
nice.
And yeah, so I guess I'm a bit more scientific friendly than most other bhakti teachers. But I'm not trying to be hostile in any way to anyone that's theistic.
Yeah.
As I see the why that would make sense to people and why they would want to do that. But
Well,
there's
yeah.
another way.
Yeah. Here's another way. It's possible. It's actually possible to keep learning, keep studying, and come up with another approach. And oh man, what a great opportunity, Michael. I'm so thankful I had this chance to speak with you. I want to give kudos and thanks to Andrew Jones for introducing us. And he was kind enough. I asked him, Andrew, who can I interview? And he said, you got to interview Michael Johnson. So I thank you, Andrew. Michael, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I would love to have the opportunity to speak with you again and do this in the future and continue conversing about philosophy and yoga because it's fascinating and you're putting the time in, which I really appreciate. And I learned a lot today and I really enjoyed listening. So thank you so much. Is there anything that you would like to leave us with?
Mm. Well, just much appreciation and gratitude for you, for Andrew and Pam, and for the work that you're doing to help make yoga accessible to the people in your community and to learn more. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you too. Bye
Thanks.
for now.